I checked the clock again before I opened the door. 11:52 p.m. The time sat there in the green dash glow while I looked down at the route packet on the passenger seat, then at the compartment list clipped beside it, then at the seal numbers I'd already checked twice since pulling off the highway. Regular gas, premium, diesel. First stop clean on paper, first stop clean in the tank, first stop clean in the timing, which mattered more on a run like that than it ever had on the city routes I'd been used to. The station sat ahead of me under a washed-out canopy that looked brighter from a distance than it did up close. One row of lights buzzed a little harder than the rest. The concrete under the pumps had that pale, chalky look you get when a place has been washed down 1,000 times and still never really comes clean. I could see enough room to angle the trailer without fighting the curb. The lot looked level enough for a smooth unload, no obvious potholes, no trash piled around the fill area, no customer cars at the pumps. That last part stuck with me more than it should have. I'd spent years running fuel into places where night still sounded alive. Spartanburg, Greer, the edge of Greenville, all those stops where you always had something in the background. Traffic hissing by, a compressor kicking on, somebody slamming a cooler door too hard. Even at 2 a.m., city work had enough light and movement to make the hour feel temporary. Like morning was already lined up somewhere behind it. Out there, north of Campobello, the quiet felt built in. It felt structural. Like the road had gone that empty on purpose and the station had been dropped into it afterward. I kept my hand on the door handle a second longer and looked through the windshield again. The place was open, or open enough. The red and blue beer signs in the front windows were on, but the glass reflected more darkness than interior. One side of the lot looked thinner on light than the other, not dark exactly, just underlit in a way that made the edge of the property harder to judge. The store itself didn't look closed. It looked withheld. That was the word that came to me later. At the time, I just told myself it was a rural stop, nearly midnight, and I was reading too much into a quiet lot because it was my first run on a route everybody had managed to make sound like a dare without ever saying anything straight. I killed the thought there and reached for my gloves. The cold hit harder outside than it had through the glass. Not bitter, just enough to tighten the skin around my knuckles and wake up the sweat at the back of my neck. I stepped down from the cab, checked the ground before putting full weight on it, then looked toward the store again. That was when I saw her. She was standing just inside the door at first, then pushed out into the light like she'd been waiting to see whether I was actually stopping there or just checking the address. Middle-aged, tired around the eyes, dark jacket over a store shirt, the kind of face you stop trying to guess the age of when somebody has worked too many overnight shifts under bad fluorescent lights. What caught me wasn't her expression. It was the way she looked at the trailer first. Not me, not the cab, the trailer. "You're the new one?" Marlene asked. "For tonight," I said. She looked past me at the trailer. "Wayne sent you out with the sheet?" "He gave me something," I said. She took a second before answering. "Yeah." I figured. That was all she gave me, and somehow it was enough to put a splinter under the skin of the whole stop. No small talk. No asking whether I'd had trouble finding the place. No complaining about the hour or the weather or the card readers or anything people working nights usually complain about when somebody shows up with a delivery. She looked at me like she was checking a box nobody had bothered showing me yet. I told myself again to stop reading into people. The work helped. It always did. I moved to the side of the trailer, checked the access point, then walked the line toward the fill area. Footing first. That's habit. You don't trust dark pavement just because it looks flat under canopy light. I found the caps, checked the labels, matched product to compartment in my head before I ever touched the hose. My hands did what they'd been trained to do. Break the sequence and you create work for yourself later, or worse. I kept my movements steady, efficient, boring. Boring is what you want around fuel. The hose came off with that familiar dead weight that always feels heavier in cold air. Metal clicked, rubber dragged softly over concrete. Somewhere inside the store, a refrigerator motor kicked on and held for a few seconds before settling back into its hum. That was the only real sound besides me. Marlene stayed near the doorway while I started the unload, not hovering close enough to help, not far enough away to ignore. Just there, watching in the way people do when they've seen the same process go wrong before and don't trust themselves to look away at the wrong moment. Twice, while I was checking the flow and watching the timing, I caught her looking north past the edge of the lot, not at the pumps, not at the road in front of the store, farther than that. I finished the first drop clean. No spill, no mismatch, no bad reading on the paperwork. I capped everything, stowed what needed stowing, signed what needed signing, and did one last quick look over the area before heading back to the cab. The kind of final scan you do, because missing one simple thing at the end of a stop is how long nights get longer. Nothing was wrong. Not in any way I could put in a logbook. Still, when I climbed back into the cab and pulled the door shut, I checked the time before I started the truck like I was making sure the place had let me go in one piece. 11:59 p.m. I eased back out of the lot, straightened the trailer, and pointed the truck north again. The paperwork was clean. The load was lighter by one stop. The road ahead looked empty in both directions. What bothered me wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the feeling of stepping into a place where everybody else already knew the shape of the night. I didn't have a name for that feeling yet. To explain why I was even on that road, I need to back up a few hours. By the time I got back on the road after that first stop, I already knew the route felt wrong. What I didn't know yet was how much of my life had already pushed me into it before the night even started. That was the thing about hauling fuel. People who'd never done it always made it sound bigger than it was, dangerous, technical, high stakes in some dramatic way. Sometimes it was, sure. Most of the time it was just a job that punished sloppiness. You learned your sequence, trusted your checks, kept your paperwork straight, and didn't let yourself get casual around anything that could burn through a bad decision faster than you could regret it. I'd been doing it long enough that I didn't romanticize any part of it anymore. I didn't call the truck my freedom or the road my peace or any of that stuff men start saying when they want to make a hard life sound chosen. I drove fuel. That was it. I didn't hate it. That counted for something. I liked work that made sense. I liked routines that held. I liked a night ending with less product on the truck than I started with, and a stack of signed slips telling me exactly what I'd done. Most days I trusted procedures more than people. Procedures didn't get moody. Procedures didn't say one thing and mean another. If you followed them, they usually paid you back by letting the shift end the way it was supposed to. That was probably part of why the North Route had gotten its hooks in me so fast. It looked ugly, but it still looked countable. More miles, worse hours, better money. I understood that kind of trade. The road ahead rolled out in narrow, dark strips between pockets of trees and the occasional mailbox catching my headlights for half a second. The heater was running low, just enough to keep the windshield clear. My coffee had gone lukewarm in the cup holder. I took a swallow anyway and tasted burnt gas station roast with that stale edge coffee gets once midnight starts pushing past it. I checked the clock again out of habit, then the mirrors, then the packet on the seat, all in the same order I'd been doing it since I left the terminal. You keep a rhythm on a run like that. The rhythm keeps your mind from inventing company. A few years earlier, I'd had more margin in my life than I knew. That's true for most people right before they lose it. The divorce had finished what the bad timing started. Not some screaming match in a front yard, not some movie scene with dishes breaking and cops showing up. Just lawyers, signatures, and the slow realization that even when nobody in the room is trying to destroy you, a life can still get cut into pieces that don't add back up right. After that came child support for Levi every month, right on time whether my week had gone well or not. Then, The credit card balance that kept hanging around because every time I got it down, something else stepped in. Tires, brakes, insurance, groceries. Then the personal loan from back when I'd still been trying to keep the house together after it was already done in every way that mattered except paperwork. I poured money into a losing fight because losing slower can feel like winning when you're in it. It wasn't. By the time all that settled into the shape of my life, I was in a one-bedroom apartment near the industrial side of Spartanburg's with thin walls, a parking lot light that leaked through the blinds, and an old pickup that had decided maintenance was going to become a personality trait. Nothing in my life was on fire. That was the problem. If it had all collapsed at once, maybe I could have rebuilt clean. Instead, it just kept arriving in pieces. A payment here. A due date there. A phone call reminding me of something I was already trying not to forget. I wasn't broke in the way people say it when they want sympathy. I was pinned. There's a difference. Broke sounds temporary. Pinned means you can still stand up, but everything in your life has already picked a handhold. My regular city route kept me upright. It covered rent, kept the pickup moving, kept the transfer to Levi's mother landing when it needed to land. But it never got ahead of anything. It kept me exactly one mistake away from falling behind again. So when Travis called the night before and told me what the North route paid, it landed where it was always going to land. I was sitting in the pickup outside my apartment when the phone buzzed. The sun was down. I still had my work boots on from the day route, and my shoulders had that dull, heavy ache they get when you've spent too long bracing yourself against the wheel without realizing it. Route north of Campobello just opened up. Night fuel. Better money, Travis said. How much better? I asked. He told me. Put me on it, I said. That was it. 4 lines. That was how fast I sold myself on it. Not because I was reckless, not because I wanted a challenge, not because I thought there was anything noble in grinding myself harder. I said yes because the number he gave me landed exactly on the sorest part of my life. It was enough extra to matter, enough extra to stop doing that thing where I sat at the kitchen table every Friday with my bank app open, moving dates around in my head like I could negotiate with math. The next morning, I met Travis at a diner near the industrial park before he headed in. The place had the same smell every place like that has before sunrise. Burnt toast, old fryer oil, coffee that never really leaves the pot long enough to count as fresh. Men in work jackets sat in booths with their shoulders rounded in, eating without much talking. Gray light pressed against the windows, but never really brightened anything. Travis looked more serious in person than he had on the phone. He kept one hand around his coffee mug, even after it had to be cooling off too much to do him any good. The next morning, Travis looked out the diner window. They can't keep a driver on that route. Why not? I asked. He didn't look at me when he answered. Depends how much you believe in patterns. I remember staring at him after that, waiting for the useful part. A pattern wasn't a reason. A pattern was the kind of thing people said when they wanted credit for noticing something without being responsible for explaining it. I didn't like vague warnings. They always felt like gossip trying to wear a hard hat. If the trucks were bad, say the trucks were bad. If the road was dangerous, say that. If the dispatcher was screwing people on mileage, say that. But don't sit across from me over cheap eggs and coffee and talk like a man's paycheck has ghosts in it. Still, Travis didn't strike me as somebody trying to entertain himself. He looked tired about it. That was different. Not excited, not dramatic, just tired. I left that diner uneasy but not changed. Bad roads didn't scare me. Long nights didn't scare me. Stories definitely didn't pay anything down. I'd spent too long living by what could be counted, and that route was the first thing in months that counted in my favor. More money. A cleaner shot at catching up. Maybe even enough room to stop feeling my chest tighten every time I thought about Friday. I didn't take the north route because I was brave. I took it because numbers had been making every important decision in my life for a long time already. By that night, All that was left to do was drive to the terminal and let the rest of it start. I got to the terminal a little after 9:30 p.m., early enough to keep from rushing anything and late enough that the place had already shifted into its night rhythm. That's a real thing at fuel terminals. Day crews and office people go home, but the place never exactly sleeps. It just changes posture. The bright functional part stays on. The unnecessary parts fall away. What's left is metal, light, paperwork, and people moving like they already know where they need to be and don't need anybody slowing them down with conversation. The lot lights threw that flat white wash over everything from above. The loading rack farther back had its own harsher glow, all steel beams and catwalk shadows cut against the dark. The air smelled the way terminals always do after sundown: fuel, hot metal cooling off, damp concrete, rubber hose, and just enough chemical sharpness in the back of the nose to remind you none of it was harmless. Painted lanes ran across the yard in faded whites and yellows. Hose assemblies hung where they belonged. Safety bollards caught the light. A yard tractor eased across one end of the lot with no wasted speed. Two drivers in reflective vests crossed in front of the office windows, one carrying paperwork, one already tugging his gloves on with his teeth. Nothing about it looked eerie. That mattered. Places get scary later in stories because they start out normal. If the terminal had felt wrong from the second I pulled in, I probably would have trusted myself less now looking back on it. But it didn't. It felt exactly like a place that loaded trucks and moved product through the night because people farther up and down the chain expected it to. I parked where I'd been told, killed the pickup, and sat there for a second, looking at the truck I'd be taking north. Clean enough, no obvious body damage, reflective striping where it should be. Stainless, catching the yard lights in broad, dull bands. It looked like every other tanker I'd worked around for years, which was comforting in the plainest possible way. Inside the office, the heat was turned up just enough to fog my glasses for half a second. There was a coffee pot on a warmer that had probably been there since before sunset, a bulletin board with safety notices nobody reads unless someone gets hurt, and the low, constant sound of printers, keyboards, and HVAC. Through the glass behind the counter, I could still see the yard lights and the moving shine of metal out by the rack. Dana Pike was at the desk when I walked up. She had the look of somebody who'd done the same check-in process and so many times she could spot missing information from the way a packet was held. Not cold, not friendly, just efficient in a way that saved everybody time. Dana looked over the packet. "First run north?" "On this route, yeah," I said. She stamped the paperwork. "Trucks loaded and sealed." "Anything I need to know?" I asked. Dana capped her pen. "Wayne'll handle that." It wasn't the answer itself that stuck with me. It was how cleanly she gave it. No awkwardness, no smile trying to take the edge off, no half second of deciding whether she should say more. It landed like a step in a routine they already had for this route. "You ask. She sends you to Wayne. End of it." She slid the packet back to me, and I caught that small pause people get when they've noticed something they don't plan on discussing. Her eyes dipped once to the route heading before she let go of the folder. Just a flick. But it was there. Back outside, I started my walk around. Tires first, then lights, then a long look at the hose setup and storage. Mirror position. Mud flaps, rear hardware, seal condition, product labels matched against the paperwork. I checked the compartments against the sheet in the same order I always did, touching the pages with the back of my glove when I didn't want to leave smears on them. Habit matters when the work can punish shortcuts. The truck itself looked fine. What didn't look fine was the packet, not in any big obvious way. More in the way things look when too many different people have held them over too short a span of time. The plastic sleeve around part of it had been replaced at least once, maybe twice. One corner was split and taped. There were pressure dents from old clips in places the current clip didn't reach. On one dispatch board mounted just inside the yard office window, I could see a line of driver names and route numbers. The north route had been written over enough times to leave ghost marks under the fresh ink. Somebody had crossed out one name with a hard, angry line, then somebody else had written a new one smaller above it. It looked less like scheduling and more like correction. That still wasn't enough to mean anything by itself. Bad routes turn over faster. Better paying routes also get fought over. A lot of things can leave ugly marks on paper. I kept checking the truck. The rear seals were intact. The metal was cold enough under my gloves to make my fingertips ache through the fabric. Somewhere behind me, air brakes sighed off another truck. A forklift or yard mule backed up with one short warning beep. I straightened from the rear assembly and looked back toward the office windows. That was when Wayne Hallbrook stepped out like he'd been there the whole time and had only just decided I'd reached the point where he needed to enter the evening. He wasn't dramatic looking. That's the truth. If you'd asked me later to describe him without the rest of the night attached, I would have said mid-50s maybe. Work jacket, lined face, steady posture, the kind of older man who doesn't waste energy trying to seem harder than he is because he's been around long enough not to need the help. What stood out was how little of him was extra. No wasted motion, no throat-clearing authority, no loud greeting from 10 feet away. A minute later, Wayne stopped beside me. "Dusty Vaughn?" "That's me," I said. He looked at the packet in my hand, then at the truck, then back at me. It wasn't a suspicious look, more like inventory. "Walk with me," he said. That was all. No explanation, no let-in. He just turned, and I found myself following him away from the office light and the normal terminal noise without asking why right away. Past the edge of the brighter concrete, toward the side of the building where the yard still hummed behind us, but felt farther off than it should have. Not hidden exactly. Just outside the part of the place where everything important went into a file, got logged on a screen, and could be explained later if somebody asked. The way Wayne moved me out of the normal workflow told me whatever came next wasn't going to be part of the paperwork anybody filed in a drawer. Wayne stopped near the side of the office where the spill of light from the windows didn't quite reach all the way to the fence line. We were still in the yard. I could still hear air systems venting off trucks, steel tapping somewhere under the rack, a printer inside the office spitting out paper in short bursts. Nothing about the place had changed. That was part of why what came next sat so wrong. He reached into the inside pocket of his work jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not a company form, not laminated, not anything official looking. Just a plain white page folded down into quarters the way men fold something they've carried more than once. Wayne handed me the folded sheet. "Read it before you pull out." "What is this?" I asked. "Instructions," he said. That was the first thing about him that really got under my skin. He never talked like a man trying to convince you. He talked like a man who had already finished deciding what mattered and didn't owe you the scenery around it. I took the paper and unfolded it under the yard light. It wasn't even headed with anything formal. No company logo, no terminal address, no date. Just a list typed out plain and simple, single-spaced, with enough wear at the fold lines to tell me I probably wasn't the first man to stand there and read it in that same patch of dim light. At first, I figured it was going to be a route-specific headache. Weird customers, tight turn-in somewhere, a stop with bad concrete, maybe one of those local notes old supervisors build up over time because they think their patch of the world runs on its own weather. I'd worked around plenty of that. Men in logistics love turning habits into doctrine. The first rule didn't hit me that hard. Do not leave the terminal late. If you are not on Highway 11 by 11:14 p.m., report the delay and surrender the route. Do not try to make up time. I remember reading that and almost rolling my eyes. That kind of thing was annoying, but not unheard of. Routes have windows, stations have timing. Somebody somewhere builds a whole run around one drop happening before another drop empties too far down. I could live with over-specific scheduling. It felt like the kind of thing an older route manager would enforce with too much pride and too little patience. Then I kept reading. You have 4 scheduled drops. If your route sheet shows a 5th, do not drive to it, do not call it in, and do not say its name over the radio. Finish your 4th stop and head south. I looked down the page. A 5th stop? Wayne kept his eyes on me. If it shows up, don't go to it. That was the first real crack. There's a difference between a bad instruction and an impossible one. Bad instructions are things you hate but can still picture. Don't park there. Don't trust that gauge. Don't take that entrance after rain. Impossible instructions are the kind that demand you agree to somebody else's version of reality before anything has happened. If your route sheet shows a 5th stop, like the paper was going to grow one on its own, like the problem wasn't dispatch or a wrong packet or a typo, like the problem was the stop itself. I kept reading because not reading would have felt childish, and because by then I needed to know how far the nonsense went. At any station north of Campobello, if the canopy lights are dark but the pumps are running, stay in the cab with the doors locked. Do not step out until someone inside turns the lights on. If no lights come on within 3 minutes, leave with the load sealed and notify Wayne Holbrook only. That one I could almost file under caution. Barely. A late-night station with dead canopy lights and active pumps could mean a power issue, but it could also mean some half-broken setup with people moving around in the dark where nobody ought to. Or it could mean somebody had learned the hard way not to let a driver step out blind into a bad lot. I didn't like the specificity, but I could still make it fit inside a practical world if I pushed. Then I hit the next one. If a vehicle stays behind you for more than 18 miles without passing, do not slow down for it, do not wave it around, and do not pull onto the shoulder. Hold the posted speed. If it is still there after you cross south of Landrum, ignore it and keep driving. That one didn't fit anywhere, not the mileage, not the phrasing, not the idea that the answer to a vehicle riding your back for that long was to treat it like weather. I could feel irritation moving up the back of my neck by then, not fear, not yet. Just the kind of frustration you get when somebody hands you rules too specific to be random and too irrational to belong in an actual safety protocol. Wayne stood there and let me have that feeling without helping. He didn't fill the silence, didn't jump in with some story to soften the edges, didn't say there had been incidents or theft attempts or anything else I could have filed in a useful mental drawer. He just waited while I kept reading. The last rule sat at the bottom of the page. Before you break the rear seal at your final drop, check the trailer in both side mirrors. If you see anyone standing beside the tank, do not get out, even if you think you know who it is. Lock the doors, leave the station, and do not stop until you reach the way pull-off south of mile marker 7. I read the last line twice. Even if I think I know who it is? Wayne looked toward the north gate. Especially then. That was the moment he stopped sounding like a crank and started sounding like somebody who had lived too long with something he was tired of naming. I looked back down at the sheet and felt that quiet shift happen inside me, the one where irritation starts giving ground to something colder. Not belief. Just the understanding that Wayne wasn't performing for me. Men doing a bit have a different energy. They watch your face too hard. They leave room for the joke to land. Wayne wasn't doing any of that. He was treating the page like part of the route, same as the truck, the load, the station list, the time window. That was worse. You really believe all this? I asked. Belief has nothing to do with it, he said. That answer did more work on me than anything else on the page. Belief would have made it personal. Superstition, folklore, somebody's dead brother story. Belief has nothing to do with it, shove the whole thing over into procedure, not something to agree with, something to follow. I looked at the sheet again. The paper felt ordinary in my hand, cheap, dry, slightly rough at the fold where too many fingers had opened it. That should have helped. It didn't. Ordinary things are harder to laugh off when nobody around you is treating them like a joke. The yard behind us kept moving. A truck rolled forward under the rack. A sodium-bright wash caught the side of a tanker and slid off. Somewhere close by, someone coughed and a door shut. The terminal was still a terminal. Product still had to move. Load still had to go north. And I was standing there with a page in my hand telling me not to trust a fifth stop that didn't exist yet, and not to get out of the truck if I saw someone I recognized standing by the trailer. That should have been enough to hand the packet back and leave. It wasn't. The money had already done most of the persuading before Wayne ever walked me into the dark. That was the truth of it. By then I was already carrying Travis's number in my head, already measuring it against the transfer due for Levi, the card payment I'd been dodging by a day or two at a time, the loan balance I was tired of pretending would shrink on its own. The sheet in my hand made me wary. It didn't make me solvent. So I folded it back down the same way Wayne had carried it and slid it into the chest pocket of my work shirt. He watched me do it, but didn't nod, didn't say good, didn't welcome me to anything. He just looked once toward the truck and once toward the gate. That was my choice. Take the route or don't. He wasn't going to sell it harder than that. I walked back across the yard with the paper sitting against my chest, like something warmer than it should have been. The truck looked the same as it had 10 minutes earlier. Stainless tank, lights, seals, mirrors, nothing transformed, nothing marked. I climbed into the cab, shut the door, and set the packet on the passenger seat. Before I started the engine, I pulled the sheet back out and read the rules one more time in the dash glow. They looked even stranger there, less like workplace instructions, and more like something copied from one exhausted man to another because nobody had found a cleaner way to say it. Then I folded the page, put it away again, and reached for the ignition. I told myself I'd followed stranger company rules than that. That lie was what carried me through the gate. A few hours later, north of Campobello, I found out the sheet was real in the only way that mattered. The station north of Campobello looked wrong before I even turned into it. Not wrong in some dramatic way. It wasn't wrecked. It wasn't abandoned. The sign was still lit out by the road, though one corner of the plastic face had gone dim enough to make the brand name look tired. The parking lot wasn't blocked off. The pumps were there. The store building was there. Everything that should have made it a working stop was still in place. But when my headlights swept across the canopy, the lights over the pumps stayed dark. I slowed anyway and took the entrance wide enough for the trailer. Old habit. If you're not sure what's waiting in a lot, you give yourself room before you give yourself opinions. The truck rolled in easy, suspension shifting under me, diesel low and steady beneath the floor. Then I saw the pump displays. They were glowing. Not bright, not every number on every face, just enough little squares of cold digital light under the dead canopy to tell me the place still had power where it counted, or where something counted. From the cab, the pump islands looked like they'd been cut out of one picture and dropped into another. Dead overhead, live down low. The kind of mismatch that pulls at the eye even before the brain catches up. And just like that, Rule 3 came back into my head in Wayne's same flat voice. At any station north of Campobello, if the canopy lights are dark but the pumps are running, stay in the cab with the doors locked. I eased to a stop where I could still pull out clean if I had to. For a second, I just sat there with my foot on the brake, looking at the lot through the windshield and feeling that first real split open up between what I'd always done and what the paper in my pocket said to do now. My instinct was simple. Get out. Walk up. Knock on the glass. Figure out if the breaker tripped or if the night clerk was asleep in back or if this place was just one more rural stop hanging together on bad wiring and habit. Solve the problem. Keep the route moving. That was work. That was normal. The rule told me to do the opposite. Sit there. Lock the doors. Wait like waiting was part of the job. That annoyed me more than it scared me. I set the brake, checked the mirrors, and hit the locks. The sound of all the doors catching at once felt louder than it should have in the quiet. Then I killed the headlights so I could see the storefront better. The place went flatter without my beams on it. The windows turned black in a different way. Not mirror black exactly. Just dark enough to hold my reflection and swallow most of the inside. The pump displays stayed lit out there on their own, pale little blocks of green and white and amber hanging in the dark like they didn't need the rest of the station to go on existing. I checked the clock. 1:07 a.m. 3 minutes. That was what the sheet said. Wait for the lights. If no lights came on within 3 minutes, leave with the load sealed. The radio crackled once with a burst of static and then went quiet again. Not a voice, just that dry electronic hiss you get sometimes in weak spots, like the set is clearing its throat for nobody. I stayed in the cab and watched the pumps. "Come on," I said. My own voice sounded too small in there. The heater was running low, and I could feel the cab air drying the back of my throat while the cold from the side window stayed pressed against my left arm. Somewhere under the dash a fan ticked on and off. My fingers drummed once against the wheel before I made them stop. Outside, nothing moved. No customer car swung in. No store door opened. No shape crossed the windows. The lot had that specific kind of overnight emptiness commercial places get when they aren't really empty, just waiting on some piece of routine to restart. I looked at the clock again. 1 minute gone. Then the pump nearest the store changed. Not much. One line on the display blinked and reset like a nozzle had been lifted and set back too fast to hold. I leaned forward without meaning to. The windows stayed black. No silhouette, no clerk, no customer. Just that tiny little change on the pump face, enough to tell me something inside the system had woken up for a second. I could feel the old work instinct coming back stronger then. Go check it. If someone's in there, knock. If nobody's in there, document it and move. Don't sit in a loaded truck staring at dead lights because an old man handed you a page that sounded half like procedure and half like a dare. I checked the clock again. 2 minutes. The lot still hadn't changed, but my body had. That was the part I remember most clearly. How waiting started to feel like doing something wrong. My shoulders got tight. My hand drifted toward the door without me telling it to. Not because I thought I was in danger. Because standing still in the middle of unfinished work started feeling worse than any answer I might find outside. The radio spat another short wash of static. I took a breath, put my hand back on the wheel, and stared through the windshield until my eyes started inventing movement in the reflections. Then, all at once, the canopy lights came on. Not a flicker. Not one bank at a time. Every overhead panel hit at once, throwing clean white light across the pumps, the lot, the front glass, the trash can by the ice chest, everything. The whole station snapped into place so fast it made the dark from a second earlier feel deliberate. The store door opened. A man stepped out in a dark jacket over a work shirt, maybe late 40s, maybe older, the kind of face you stop reading much into after enough bad sleep and fluorescent light have worked it over. He looked at the truck first, then at me through the windshield, and lifted one hand once like I was late to a conversation he'd expected me to understand. I opened the cab door and stepped down, feeling irritated all over again now that the place looked normal enough to be embarrassing. A man opened the store door. "You did right staying in the truck." I stopped beside the cab. "Power issue?" He held the door for me. "Wayne still telling drivers that one?" "Telling us what?" I asked. He didn't answer that. "You unloading or not?" That was the part that got me. Not what he said exactly. Men on night shifts talk past questions all the time. They're tired, busy, or just mean enough to enjoy it. It was how unsurprised he sounded. like there was no gap at all between a driver sitting in a locked cab under a dead canopy and the station lights coming back all at once 3 minutes later. Like that sequence already had a place in his head, and he didn't see any reason to explain it to me. I did the delivery anyway. At that point, what else was I going to do? The canopy was on. The fill point was accessible. The paperwork matched. The truck was where it needed to be. So I did what I'd been trained to do and made myself care more about the job than the feeling under it. I checked my footing, broke the necessary seals, ran the hose, watched the transfer, checked the product twice, kept my eyes on gauges, fittings, concrete, and timing. The man went back inside at some point and didn't hover while I worked. That almost helped. It made the place feel less staged, less interested in me personally. Just another ugly stop on a route with too many little quirks and too many people who'd gone quiet around them. When I went in to finish the paperwork, he was behind the counter writing something on a yellow legal pad that he turned face down before I got close enough to read it. He signed where he needed to sign, slid the paper back to me, and never once asked whether it was my first night. He already knew, or knew enough. I walked back out into full canopy light that still felt newer than it should have, climbed into the cab and shut the door behind me. The load was lighter. The slip was signed. Nothing had happened that I could report without sounding foolish. If I'd called dispatch and said the station lights came on right when the waiting period ended, what was that supposed to be? A complaint? A coincidence? A superstition with paperwork attached? I checked the clock, put the truck in gear, and rolled back toward the road. That was the moment the sheet in my pocket stopped feeling stupid and started feeling expensive. By the time I left the dark canopy station, I'd stopped pretending the sheet in my pocket was just Wayne's private religion. That didn't mean I trusted it. It meant I'd lost the easier option, which was laughing at it. The road north narrowed in feel even when it didn't actually narrow. The asphalt stayed the same width, the center line stayed where it belonged, and the truck still tracked clean if I kept my hand steady. But the space around the road changed. Fewer store lights, longer dead stretches between houses, more trees close to the shoulder. Every little business that was still open looked temporary, like it had only been allowed to borrow light for an hour and would have to give it back before morning. On a city route, you're always moving through layers of other people's lives. Apartment windows, gas stations with 2 customers and 1 guy buying dip. A bar still open, a traffic light cycling for nobody. You never feel fully alone because even empty roads in town still belong to a larger pattern. That stretch north felt different. It felt less like a route and more like a corridor. Something long and dark that existed mainly to carry you farther from places that would feel useful if something went wrong. The truck gave me the same sounds it always gave me. Engine steady. A faint shake through the steering wheel when the pavement changed texture. Product moving in the compartments with that heavy, delayed slosh you learn to feel more than hear. I kept one hand low on the wheel and let the other rest near the packet on the passenger seat without touching it. I told myself I was only waiting for the next turn, the next sign, the next stop. I told myself a clean job was still a clean job no matter how much people on that route wanted to turn basic procedures into folklore. Then I looked down at the packet again, not because I needed it, not really. I already knew how many drops were left. I already had the sequence in my head. But after the station with the dead canopy and live pumps, I wanted the comfort of paper, something printed, something that stayed what it was when you glanced away from it. I pulled the packet closer. This wasn't here. The words came out before I could stop them. Under the dashlight, the page looked normal. That was the worst part. No smear, no odd typeface, no jagged handwritten note squeezed into the margin. Just another line in the same font as the others, same spacing, same neat little block of information where there should only have been 4 total stops on the route. I checked the first page, then the route sequence, then the line again. Still there. A 5th stop. Nothing about it was dramatic. It didn't say cemetery. It didn't say condemned property. It didn't say anything that would have looked suspicious to someone who hadn't already been handed that folded sheet by a man who didn't care whether you believed him. It looked bureaucratically ordinary. The kind of line a dispatcher adds 10 minutes before release because somebody forgot to attach a location earlier. That made it worse. If it had looked wrong, I could have dismissed it. Instead, it looked right in exactly the way Wayne had warned me it would. I tried to build useful explanations. Wrong printout, old page stuck in the sleeve, mixed packet from some previous run, dispatch correction that never got radioed in. All of those were possible. I'd seen stranger paperwork problems in my life than an extra line on a route sheet. The trouble was, every explanation I came up with felt thinner than the sentence in Wayne's rules. If your route sheet shows a fifth, do not drive to it, do not call it in, and do not say its name over the radio. I should have put the page back then, should have set it face down and driven the rest of the run by order and mileage in the route I had already memorized. That would have been the smart move. Instead, I leaned closer. That was the mistake. Not a big one yet. Not a door opening, not a wrong turn, not anything I could circle on paper and say there. That was where it started. Just, attention. Me giving more of it than I needed to. Reading the line once was one thing. Studying it was another. The stop name sat there in plain print, ordinary as a billing address. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't even fully let myself say it in my head. But I looked too long, tried too hard to fit it onto the map I'd been holding in my mind since leaving Spartanburg. Was it near one of the other roads out there? Was it attached to a station that had changed owners? Was it a cross street Travis hadn't mentioned? I felt that mean little itch curiosity always brings with it, the one that says, if you can just understand the thing a little better, you'll own it again. The road bent left, and I had to put the packet back down and both hands on the wheel. That was when I noticed headlights behind me, not close, not riding my bumper. Just there. A car, maybe an SUV, too far back to read as anything specific yet. Two white headlights holding steady in the mirrors while the road curved and straightened and curved again. I checked once, then twice. Still there. That didn't mean anything by itself. Night roads work that way. Sometimes you wind up with the same vehicle behind you for 10, 12 miles, because nobody wants to pass a tanker on a dark 2-lane stretch, and nobody has a good place to do it safely. I let it go for a minute, then another. Then I checked the mileage marker and started keeping count without admitting to myself that was what I was doing. The headlights held their distance too well, not exactly fixed, but close enough to feel deliberate. They didn't crowd me, they didn't flash, they didn't swing out like the driver was testing for room to pass. They just stayed where they were, patient and uncommitted, as if following the truck mattered more than getting around it. At 12 miles, I told myself I was being stupid. At 15 miles, I rolled one shoulder to get some tension out of my neck and realized my jaw had gone tight. At 18, Rule 4 stopped sounding ridiculous. I looked in the mirror again. I've got a car behind me. I reached for the radio before I fully decided to. The handset felt cold and slightly sticky with that old plastic texture equipment gets after too many hands and too many temperature changes. Wayne, answer me, I said over the radio. Static came first, then Wayne said, I'm here. The relief I felt hearing him made me angrier than it should have. I didn't want him to be right enough for his voice to matter. There's a fifth stop on the packet. He took a second before answering. Then don't read it any longer. I stared out through the windshield into the dark lane ahead and almost laughed from frustration. That was the problem with Wayne. Every answer he gave me was useful, only if you'd already accepted the shape of the thing he was refusing to explain. I looked in the mirror again. I've got a car behind me. Keep moving, Wayne said. That's it? I asked. That's enough, he said. Then the line went quiet, except for a low bed of hiss. I wanted more than that. Wanted the normal kind of answer. Wanted someone to say it was a local driver or some dispatch mix-up or a prank the older guys played on new men because they were bored and territorial. I wanted a world where every strange thing could still be reduced to people acting badly or systems failing in boring ways. Instead, I had Wayne, answering like a man who was speaking from inside a set of boundaries I hadn't learned yet and wasn't allowed to test the long way. So I kept moving. That was where the road started feeling wrong, not transformed, not dreamlike, still asphalt, still centerline, still the same truck under me, the same heater ticking on and off, the same dry taste of old coffee at the back of my mouth. But small things stopped landing where I expected them to. The car behind me looked farther back in one glance and closer in the next, without ever seeming to gain on me the way a real vehicle would. A right-hand bend I could have sworn should have opened onto a side road took longer to arrive than it ought to have. A small reflective sign for a local road stood on the shoulder where I didn't remember seeing one on the drive in, though I told myself maybe I'd just missed it under the stress of the earlier stop. My speed stayed steady. My hands stayed steady. The route itself did not feel steady anymore. The fifth stop sat on the packet like something patient. I didn't pick it back up, but I knew exactly where it was on the seat beside me, and that was enough to make it feel present in the cab. The route had been 4 stops when I started. That was the shape of the night. Now it felt like the road itself was trying to widen just enough to make room for a 5th one, not through magic, through suggestion, through the ugly, simple pressure of repetition and doubt. You see a line once, then again, then drive long enough in the dark and start wondering whether the world you started with was actually the mistaken one. That thought bothered me enough that I rolled the window down a crack just to let cold air in and cut through the cab heat. Night air hit the side of my face sharp and damp. Pine, wet dirt, old gasoline somewhere on the wind when I passed one shut-down roadside place with dark pumps and a Coke machine humming by the ice chest. The cold helped. It made the inside of the truck feel like a place with edges again. The headlights behind me were still there. I kept my speed at the posted limit, didn't wave them around, didn't touch the shoulder. Every few miles I found myself wanting to anyway, not out of courtesy but out of the need to break the pattern, to make the road do something normal and human again. Let the car pass, watch it go, re-enter the world where traffic solves itself. I didn't. There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes from obeying something you don't fully understand. By the time the final stop should have been coming up, I could feel that kind of tiredness behind my eyes. Not sleepiness exactly. More the strain of holding your mind inside too narrow a lane for too long. Then the station appeared. At first it was just a low light ahead on the right, then a sign half lit from below, then the outline of the canopy and store coming into shape as I got closer. Smaller than the earlier stops, more isolated. The lot wasn't dark, but it wasn't properly bright either. One side of the canopy was giving full light, the other side looked thin and pale, like the bulbs that were all 1 week from burning out. The store windows glowed with that weak convenience store fluorescence that makes a place look both open and already closing. No cars at the pumps, no obvious clerk at the counter from what I could see on approach, not dead, just under alive. I checked the packet without touching the 5th line. This was the last real stop. It had to be. Mileage matched closely enough, sequence matched. The practical part of my head seized on that and refused to let go. I swung the truck into the lot slow and careful, letting the trailer straighten before I lined up for the drop. Gravel popped once under a rear tire at the edge of the pavement, then stopped. The air outside looked colder there than it had at the other stations. Maybe it was only the lighting. Hard to tell by then. I checked the mirrors. The car behind me did not pull into the lot. That should have helped. It didn't. It only changed the shape of the pressure. I brought the truck to a full stop and set the brake. The engine idled under me, steady and mechanical and real. The route packet sat on the passenger seat. Wayne's folded sheet sat in my shirt pocket like a second pulse. By the time I reached that last stop, I no longer felt like a man on a delivery route. I felt like a man being watched finish a sequence. I sat there with the truck idling and both hands still on the wheel for a few seconds before I moved. That was normal enough. Last stop of a night run, you take a second. You check the lot again. You check the clock. You run the unload in your head before you start putting your boots back on the ground. Fatigue is when small mistakes get expensive, and the last stop is where men usually feel safest for the dumbest reason possible. You're almost done. Almost done is when people stop respecting sequence. I knew that. I'd known it for years. So I reached for the packet, checked the line for the final delivery without letting my eyes drift lower on the page, then looked over the lot one more time through the windshield. Thin light under the canopy. Store windows bright in patches and dead in others. No customer cars, no clerk visible from where I sat, no movement around the pumps. Just the steady idle under me and the faint vibration in the cab from the engine and the night air pressing cold against the glass. My right hand went toward the door, then stopped. Rule 5. It came back clean and flat in Wayne's voice, same as the others had. Before you break the rear seal at your final drop, check the trailer in both side mirrors. I remember letting out one breath through my nose like I was irritated at myself for even doing it. The rest of the night had already taught me better than to skip a line on that sheet, but some part of me still hated the feeling of being managed by something I didn't respect. I shifted in the seat, leaned slightly, and checked the driver's side mirror first. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the silver length of the tank catching bad canopy light, the edge of the lot behind me, and the dark beyond that where the property gave way to whatever stood outside the station's little circle of usefulness. Then I checked the passenger side mirror. That was where the shape was. Not moving, not stepping out, not rushing the truck or lifting a hand or doing anything a sane man could point at and call an immediate threat. It was just there beside the trailer, in the exact place the rule had made room for in my head before I ever got to that lot. A person-sized shape standing close to the tank. That alone should have been enough to keep me in the cab. A stranger beside a loaded trailer in the middle of the night is already a hard no. But that wasn't what made my pulse jump. What made it jump was how fast my mind tried to make it somebody. Not because I could see the face. I couldn't. The angle was wrong and the light was thin, and the mirror shrank everything down into something flatter than real depth. But the shape wasn't broad enough for a grown man. It looked smaller than that. Narrow shoulders. Stillness, where there should have been some restless adult motion. It wasn't a child, not in any clear way. But it leaned toward one in just enough places for my brain to do the rest. That's what was wrong with it. Not what it looked like, what it reached for. I stared harder, which was its own kind of mistake. The longer I looked, the more details my mind wanted to supply. A jacket shape, height, a stance, the kind of short-circuit recognition throws when it doesn't have enough truth to stand on by itself. My mouth had gone dry. I could hear the fan under the dash, the low engine hum, the faint click somewhere in the cooling panel, every tiny mechanical sound inside the cab suddenly too close because all of my attention was pinned to that mirror. Then I heard it. Dad? I looked into the mirror again. The shape beside the trailer didn't move. No, I said. That word came out rougher than I expected, like my throat had to push through more than one answer to get there. I didn't think of Levi as a shape first. I thought of him as motion, running too hard at a ball field, leaning into the passenger seat to ask if I had gum, sitting with one knee up on the diner booth the one time I picked him up late and he was still half asleep, and trying to act older than he was. That was how he lived in my head, in movement, in voice. in small little human things that belonged to him so completely, I never had to work at remembering them. So hearing that word in that voice, or close enough to one for my body not to care about the difference right away, hit lower than fear. It hit in the place where fathers still move before they think. My hand went to the door. Not all the way, not with any plan, just a reflex, fast and stupid and honest. For 1 second, I wasn't in a loaded truck on a bayed route with a folded sheet in my pocket. I was a man who had spent years coming up short in smaller ways and suddenly got handed the shape of the one thing he would always open a door for. When I reached for the door, Wayne's voice came through the radio. "Do not get out." I froze with my hand still near the latch. The radio hadn't made a sound for a while before that. No static, no check-in, no reason for him to be talking right then, except that somehow, somewhere inside the shape of that route, he knew where I was in the sequence. I pulled my hand back slow enough to feel how badly I wanted not to. That was the part I've never been able to explain cleanly. Fear is one thing. Fear makes sense. You feel it, you manage it, you survive it, or you don't. But that moment in the cab wasn't built on fear. It was built on hope, and hope is meaner when it's wrong. Fear would have kept me still. Hope was what nearly got the door open. I kept looking into the passenger side mirror because not looking felt worse. The shape was still there, still in that same place by the trailer, still not moving in any way. A real person would have moved by then. No pacing, no waving, no attempt to get my attention through the glass. Just waiting with the kind of patience that made the whole lot feel narrower around the truck. My heartbeat had climbed high enough that I could feel it in the side of my neck. I put both hands back on the wheel just to give them something to do, and realized one of them was shaking. I thought about Levi then in the ugliest, simplest way possible. Not the abstract version of him I used whenever I was explaining my life to myself. Not child support, not visitation, not a picture in my wallet. I thought about him real. Small hand on a door handle, cleats in the back seat, the way kids say dad when they need something and assume the world will answer back for them. Whatever was standing by that trailer had reached for exactly that. That was the first moment all night I wanted to break a rule for something other than impatience. That was what made it worse. I stayed where I was and kept checking the mirrors. The shape was still there beside the tank, too still to be mistaken for anything human once I forced myself to look at it that way. The truck idled under me. The heater moved dry air across my legs. Everything inside the cab still sounded ordinary, and I clung to that because ordinary was all I had left. My breathing had gone shallow without me noticing. I forced one full breath in, then another, and looked away from the mirror long enough to give my eyes something else to lock onto. The route packet on the seat, the glow of the dash, the edge of the radio mic hanging from its hook, the manifest board, numbers, labels, sequence, work. I needed work. Something built by men, not whatever was standing outside waiting to be led into the shape of the night. I pulled the packet closer, more to have paper in my hands than because I meant to read it. The cab light was too dim to do much with, so I tipped the pages under the dash glow instead, and that was when I saw something tucked behind the manifest board. Just a corner at first. Dirty white, bent over on itself, caught behind the plastic edge like somebody had shoved it there fast and forgotten it, or meant for the next man to find it, only if he got desperate enough. My mouth had gone so dry I had to swallow before I could get enough spit together to wet my lips. I slid 2 fingers behind the board and pulled the scrap free. Behind the manifest board, I found a scrap with Caleb Doss's name on it. It was written on the back of some older form or receipt paper, the kind that tears soft once it's been folded in a pocket too long. Caleb's name was printed at the top in block letters that looked like they'd been written by somebody trying very hard not to shake. Under it was one sentence. It said, "It doesn't need your name. It needs your answer." I read it twice, then a third time. And all at once, the whole night shifted under the same skin. The fifth stop. Don't say its name over the radio. The dark canopy with the live pumps. Don't step out until the lights come on. The car behind me. Don't make room for it. The figure beside the trailer. Don't get out even if you think you know who it is. The rules had never been about bad luck. They were about response. That was what my hand had almost given away on the door handle. Not just movement, answer, recognition, agreement. The shape outside the truck didn't need me to believe in it. It didn't need me to understand it. It needed me to do one thing that would let it count. Speak to it, step toward it, name it, treat it like it belonged in the same order as everything else on the route. My eyes went back to the passenger side mirror. The shape had not moved. That made it worse and better at the same time. Worse because it meant it was still there. Better because the stillness was starting to tell me something. It wasn't trying to break in. It wasn't clawing at the door. It wasn't rushing the truck. It was waiting on me. I grabbed the radio. "What is it?" I said over the radio. This time there was no irritation in my voice, no challenge. I sounded like a man trying to keep hold of something thin and practical while the edges of the world loosened around him. Wayne took longer than he had all night. "It follows the route." "That means nothing," I said. "It learns what belongs there," he said. That was all. No ghost story, no origin, no old wreck out on Highway 11, no dead family at a burned station, no local legend with a woman in white in a ditch and all the rest of the junk people dress fear up in when they want it to sound decorative. Wayne didn't give me any of that, and because he didn't, I trusted what little he did say more than I wanted to. It follows the route. It learns what belongs there. I sat with that and looked back through the night one piece at a time, like I was retracing a spill line to the source. By then I started seeing the rules differently. Rule 1 didn't feel like it was really about punctuality anymore. It felt like getting onto the route in the right window before something had time to widen around me. Rule 2 felt less like a paperwork problem and more like a warning not to let an extra stop become real just because it appeared where real instructions belonged. Rule 3 wasn't superstition anymore either. It felt like a way of keeping me from stepping out into a place that had already decided my truck belonged there. And Rule 4 stopped sounding like paranoia once I understood it as refusal. Don't make room for something that only stays behind you because you haven't admitted it any farther in. And Rule 5. Rule 5 was the meanest because it understood the part of a man that can be reached fastest. By the time I got to that point, my heart had slowed enough for the thoughts to land clean. Not calmly, cleanly. There's a difference. Calm is comfort. Clean is when you can finally see the shape of a problem that was hurting you in the dark. By then I didn't think the thing outside the truck got stronger just because it was frightening. I thought it got stronger when I treated it like part of the route. When I answered. The note from Caleb Doss stayed in my hand. His name had meant almost nothing to me when Travis first mentioned drivers coming and going, just another man who had touched that route before me. Now he felt closer than anybody had all night, closer than Wayne even. Wayne still lived inside those rules like a foreman. Caleb had left me a sentence from the other side of fear, from the part where you finally know what almost got you. I thought about Caleb writing that note after making it back south, trying to leave the next man something cleaner than panic. My thumb worked the torn edge of the scrap while I kept watching the mirror. The shape was still there, not moving closer, not fading yet, just remaining. And the patience of that was what truly changed the fear. Up to then, the whole night had felt like a chain of weirdnesses, each bad in its own way. The station, the fifth stop, the car, the figure. But now they were one thing, one system, not a haunting scattered through random places, a route problem, a route thing, something that rode the line north and learned enough from repetition to imitate what men expected to find on it. I looked at the mirror again. Then why keep the route open? Wayne answered in the same flat voice. Because men still need the money. I sat there with that answer in my ear and Levi's transfer date already rising in my mind without my permission. That was the ugliest part of Wayne's answer. Not that it was cynical, that it was true. He didn't say because the company doesn't care. He didn't say because nobody believes the drivers. He didn't say because there's no proof. All of those might have been true too. But the truest answer was still the simplest one. Loads still had to move. Stations still needed product. Men still needed the pay. The route stayed alive because need is stronger than revulsion most of the time, and because if there is a system for surviving something, somebody will keep using it as long as the money clears. That was the moment the whole story of the route changed in my head. The men who'd quit it maybe hadn't quit because it was impossible. They'd quit because once you know what's waiting on that road, every mile starts charging interest in a currency that doesn't show up on a pay stub. They'd quit because the rules worked well enough to bring you back alive, but not well enough to let you forget why you needed them. I kept breathing, kept my eyes moving from mirror to mirror the way I would have checked pressure, flow, or lane clearance on any other night. Work habit again. It was all I had. The thing outside did not scare me less once I understood it. It scared me differently. Before that, it had felt random, like the night was breaking apart around me for reasons I couldn't reach. Now it felt worse in one way and better in another. Worse because it had intent. Better because intent means limits. If it needed something from me, then not giving it mattered. If the rules existed, then they had survived long enough to be written because somebody had followed them and come back. I looked at the passenger side mirror again and forced myself not to see my son in the shape by the trailer. Not Levi. Not anybody. Just a thing waiting where a rule said it would wait, wanting what Caleb's note had told me not to hand over. It had stopped feeling random. It had started feeling patient. "Dad," it said again. I kept my hands on the wheel and said nothing. That was harder than it sounds. By then I understood what it wanted. Not belief, not fear, just an answer. So I sat still and let every instinct in me burn. My eyes kept going mirror to mirror. Passenger side, driver side, back again, tank, darkness, shape. I told myself the same thing each time. Real people move. Real kids shift their feet. Real bodies in the cold don't hold still forever. At some point, the voice stopped. That should have helped. It didn't. Silence can be worse once something has already picked the word it knows will reach you. The lot outside the truck felt stretched thin around me, like the light under the canopy only covered the idea of the station and not much else. The figure stayed in the mirror, patient as a posted sign. Then, little by little, it stopped holding its shape. I don't mean it dissolved. It wasn't that clean. It was more like my eye stopped being able to land on it the same way. One glance, it was there. The next glance, it was thinner. Then I'd look back after checking the other mirror, and what I saw was only the bright line of the tank and a patch of dark that no longer arranged itself into shoulders and height and weighting. I didn't trust it right away. I kept checking. Passenger side, driver side, passenger side again. Nothing. Just steel, bad light, and the edge of the lot. I checked again. Still nothing. When the mirror finally showed only tank and darkness, I got out and finished the drop. I moved fast, but not sloppy. That was the difference that mattered. Sloppy gets men hurt around fuel, even on good nights. I opened the door, stepped down, and kept my eyes where they needed to be and nowhere else. The concrete was cold under my boots. The air felt sharper outside the cab, damp enough to carry every smell cleanly. Old gas, wet pavement, stale fryer grease drifting out from somewhere in the store, and that metallic cold smell you only get around steel after midnight. I went straight to the rear, broke the seal, and kept my hands on the work. No scanning the lot, no checking the dark beyond the pumps, no listening for another voice. Sequence, hardware, hose, connect, confirm, start the unload. Once the transfer began, I watched the setup the way I would have on any other stop. Flow, fittings, ground under my boots, product where it was supposed to go. I kept my body angled toward the truck and the station equipment because those were real things with real consequences. If something moved out beyond the edge of the lot, I gave it nothing. No glance, no second thought. It had already had enough of both. The whole final drop felt narrower than any delivery I'd ever done. Not harder, narrower, like the work itself had become a corridor I had to stay inside of if I wanted to walk back out with my life still arranged the same way. No clerk came out while I unloaded. If somebody was inside the store, I never saw them clearly. A light burned over the counter. Another flickered somewhere deeper in the building. That was enough. When the compartment was empty and the hose was cleared, I stowed everything clean, checked my fittings twice, and closed up in the same order I'd done 1,000 times before. Familiar motion was the only mercy left in the night by then. Inside the store, the paperwork got signed without conversation. A tired man in a station jacket slid the slip back across the counter and never looked at me long enough to ask anything. I didn't ask anything either. By then, the need to understand had burned off into something plainer. Finish, leave, head south. Back in the cab, I locked the doors before I shifted into gear. The drive back down toward Spartanburg was quieter, but not easier. I didn't feel chased anymore. I didn't feel watched in that direct, narrow way I had pulling into the final lot. But I also didn't feel safe. I felt like I had made it through a section of something by following the terms closely enough not to be taken any farther into it. That's not the same thing as beating it. The road still ran black between the trees. The station lights I passed still looked too thin against the dark around them. Every now and then I checked the mirrors expecting those headlights to reappear behind me. But when they did show up again on the road, they behaved like normal traffic. They passed when they had room. They fell away when they were slower. The route felt less interested in me once I stopped answering it. That was the closest thing to relief I got. By the time the terminal lights came back into view, the sky still hadn't even started thinking about morning. Wayne was waiting when I rolled back in. Not standing in a spotlight, not staged up by the office door like he'd been pacing for me. Just there, near the edge of the yard, where incoming trucks had to slow anyway, hands in his jacket pockets, posture unchanged from the first time I saw him. He looked at me, then at the truck, then at the paperwork when I climbed down and handed it over. He looked at the signed sheet. "You finished the route." "Looks that way," I said. He kept his eyes on me. "You coming back tomorrow?" I thought about Levi, the transfer due, the rest of it. "Yeah," I said, "I'll be here." Wayne gave one small nod like I'd confirmed a fuel reading. Nothing more. No welcome, no warning, no congratulations for making it through the first night. Maybe he knew better than to dress survival up like an accomplishment. Maybe on that route, coming back only meant you'd decided the price still fit inside your life somewhere. I drove home in the pickup after sunrise, with my hands feeling older than they had the day before. I slept some. Not well. Every time I drifted off, I'd hear that one word again in the wrong voice, and come back up too fast with my heart trying to outrun the room. By afternoon, I was awake for good, sitting at the little kitchen table in my apartment with a mug of coffee going cold beside me, and the transfer date for Levi sitting there in my head like it always did. I didn't stop being afraid. That's the part I'd be lying about if I told the story any other way. I wasn't brave by then. I wasn't numb. I wasn't drawn to it. I didn't come out of that night feeling chosen or tougher or smarter than the men who quit. If anything, I understood them better. Knowing the rules worked wasn't comforting. It just meant the route had a shape you could survive if you were willing to keep paying attention every second you were on it. and the money was still the money. By the next evening, I knew exactly what was waiting north of Campobello, and I still turned the pickup toward Spartanburg anyway. Fear never paid anything on time. That was the problem.